Hi guys, just got off my math call with you. All right, when we left off, Gib had come home and Roxy was there, and he was very happy to see her and was kind of hanging out and playing with her. And she was pretty surprised because he even said, "Do you want to play doggy?" As I walked to Roxy's bedroom to get the leash, I thought how weird it was for me to feel this had been a good day. After all, tucked into my backpack, old Shrapnel's spitball punishing assignment lay in wait. I guess some days feel good mainly because other days are so bad. So I played doggy with Roxy, and though I wouldn't say it was actually fun, it didn't feel as much like a chore as usual. I kept looking at Roxy and thinking how great it was that she could run around laughing, her whole body working perfectly. Afterward, I went out and shot hoops again, trying to stick to the original chain of events as closely as I could. I wasn't sure if I could still get the honor. Things were already so different from before, but I figured it couldn't hurt. When it was about time for me to walk to the woods, I went back into the house, feeling jittery again. Would Dad be on the phone with Rainey? Would she be telling him she'd come down with the flu? Dad's voice drifted out of the kitchen. He wasn't on the phone with Rainey. Instead, he was singing a somewhat cracked version of a square dance tune. Rainey was going to babysit. Ash and I could go to the carnival without Roxy, and she would be safe, safe, safe. I nearly whooped with joy. My plan was working. I told Dad I was going over to the woods for a while. Just as before, he reminded me to be back in time for dinner. No problem, I said. See you soon. I found the empty Coke can in front of our house, and this time, instead of kicking it, I picked it up and tossed it in the air, running to catch it, imagining what it would be like to be a star receiver in the NFL. I did that all the way to the woods and was feeling so good, I nearly forgot I'd ever been worried about using the unner. It was beginning to look like smooth sailing from here on out, whether the old man reappeared or not. If he didn't, Roxy would still be okay. If he did, I'd get the unner back and be invincible. I could make everything happen the way I wanted for the rest of my life. In fact, I might even find a way to live forever. If you're thinking that he sounds awfully optimistic, I'm thinking the same thing. I started down the leaf crunchy path, looking left and right. I was just about to give up when the old man stepped out of the shadows between two tree trunks. He looked just as strange as he had before. His shiny, silvery hair stood out around his head as if he'd rubbed it with a party balloon. Pale vapor and the weird electrical smell rose from his rumpled coat. "Hi," I said, as if I'd known him forever, which, silly as though it may seem, was exactly the way I felt. "How are you doing?" He leaned back and laughed. "You're not so scared this time, huh?" "What, you remember last time?" My voice startled into a squeak. It hadn't occurred to me that he might remember events that had happened before I and them. Nobody else did. Suddenly I was a little afraid of him again. My head filled with all the forgotten questions that remained stubbornly unanswered. He nodded. "Yes, I remember. Let's find that flat rock again, shall we?" "I need to sit down. Jumping around like this is hard on my knees. Old injury." He smiled like someone who had a huge secret, beckoned, and started down the path in his slow, uneven way. "Jumping around?" I asked. I hadn't noticed him jumping around at all. "Well, in a manner of speaking. I don't mean jumping around in the literal sense. I mean jumping around in the..." He waved a hand through the air. "Haven't thought of a word for it yet." He glanced at the back of his hand as he had before, and I got a better look at the shiny, flat panel set into his skin. A small lighted display of numbers flashed across it in neon green. "What's that?" I asked. His eyes twinkled. "Pretty cool, huh? It's kind of like a watch, but not really. Some things never change. I still don't have much time." There they were again, words nobody his age should be using. Cool, kind of. I tugged at his arm and we stopped in the middle of the path. "Who are you? How come you remember things I end when nobody else does? How come you gave the honor to me and not some other person?" He looked at me for a second or two, chewing his lower lip in a thoughtful way. Then he turned and started walking again. "I know you're full of questions. Some of them I can answer, some I can't. Some you haven't even thought of yet. Not that I wouldn't like to tell you everything. Speaking of the honor," he reached into the folds of his coat and pulled out the little gray box. It looked just the same as it had before. Our progress toward the rock slowed down as he struggled to give it to me. I could see his muscles tightening as he strained to place it in my hands. He looked at me, half frowning, half grinning, his eyes full of excitement. "I've been thinking about why this is so hard," he said. "Time is like most things. You need energy to change it. The more you change it, the more energy it takes. And this is a big change. Also, the farther you are from what you want to change, the more energy it takes. And I'm farther from the event than you are." The half grin disappeared from his face and only the frown was left. Oops, I probably shouldn't have said that. Farther from what event? Shouldn't have said what? "Nothing, nothing," he replied. With a final hard shove, he once again succeeded in handing me the honor. I thanked him, though I'm sure I didn't sound as grateful as I should have. I was just so curious about him and so frustrated by his refusal to tell me anything I could really sink my teeth into. It was hard to be polite. "Be extra careful with it," he said. "It's even more important this time." That stopped me dead in my tracks. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. Invisible ants scuttled along my backbone as everything suddenly fell into place. "You know my future. You're from the future, aren't you?" I've replayed this scene in my mind 1,000 times since then, trying to remember every tiny detail. Looking back on it now, I know it was one of the most important moments of my life. We'd come to the rock, and he sat down on it. A small, sympathetic smile crossed his face. "Yes, I know your future and a lot more," he said. "You want me to tell you what's going to happen tonight, tomorrow, 5 years from now. You want to know how I know. All I can say is that if I told you, the consequences might be more awful than you can imagine. I've already taken terrible risks, telling you as much as I have, doing as much as I have. So don't ask. Just take the honor with you tonight. Don't drop it in the leaves. Most important of all, don't use it unless you have to." I rubbed my thumb across the honor where the front of the case met the back, and the black tape ran around them both in a sticky ridge. The old man stood up and put one hand on each of my shoulders. In spite of his age, he was tall, and an atmosphere of power and excitement surrounded him. "It looks homemade because I made it in a hurry, and I made it for a reason so awesome you wouldn't believe it if you knew it. You're more important than you know, Gib, and so is Roxy. Everything depends on you." He touched his forehead in a kind of salute. Among the trees I caught the same shadowy, almost invisible motion I'd seen the last time he gave me the honor, just as he disappeared. "You're going?" he said in a voice like a rusty hinge. "I have to. Do you see my colleagues in the lab?" He pointed towards the wavering figures among the shadows. "They're only visible because the time bubble is deteriorating. Like I said before, we're not very good at this yet." He shuffled backwards slowly. "I won't see you again unless something goes terribly wrong. But I want you to know." He was fading even as I watched. "I want you to know I trust you, and I'm proud of you." It was a long time before I turned and made my way carefully through the twilight, back to Cherrywood Drive and a life that would never be the same. Dun dun dun. All right, that's the end of the chapter. I'm going to stop there. Hope you enjoyed.